Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the 5th episode of the 14th season of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown, and this is the only weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. No check-in this week on our pal Jake Thistle. The voting for this round is split over 2 weeks, I guess, so we'll learn whether Jake advances to the next round on next week's show. And apparently, some other reality show has been cancelled, and it might mean some changes to the American Idol schedule. So, in any case, there seemed to be a pretty good groundswell of support for Jake in his home state of New Jersey, as well as within the Petty community. So I'm quietly confident I think our boy's going to be going through. One other quick thing, I wanted to say thanks again to all the brilliant feedback I've had over the whole AI artwork issue. Many of you reached out in private or on the post to offer your support for that approach, and those who criticised the choice to use AI were very measured in that constructive feedback. So as you may have seen across my social media channels, I decided that I would pull the artwork and rethink the approach of this season. And weirdly, I'm way happy with the aesthetic that I ended up going with, you know, the album cover background and the street signs. So it ended up being a blessing in disguise. And I know AI is a thorny issue, and I know it has its place in the world. You know, it's fantastic for helping reduce coding time in my day job, but I think I do have to side with the artist when it comes to using it in the creative disciplines. It's funny because I didn't initially feel conflicted about using it at all, but I would never in a million years let AI write a single paragraph for me because it's so bad. So, you know, when artists say that it's crap, you sort of say, well, yeah, you're the expert, so of course you're going to know that. And of course, I can't stand it in music. So anyway, at least I can draw a line under all that and move on now. I've had the artwork for next season done for months, probably almost a year. And actually earlier tonight, I got all the artwork done for the album, for the song episodes for season 16, Hypnotic Eye. I've come up with a nice little plan for that one too that I hope you'll like, and I hope you'll notice. There's a little thing that I end up doing there that I hope you notice. So, next up, last week's poll. Down south came back overwhelmingly positive, as you'd expect, with 72% of you voting it a top tier 10 out of 10. 26% of you putting it in the 7 to 9 range, and 2% of you giving it a 6 or below. And no one gave me any reason for a low score on this one, and I'd love to know what part of the song doesn't connect. So, remember, this is a very cool community, and no one's going to run you out of town if you don't dig a specific song. So just let us know why. I'm always curious about that. We had lots of comments on this week's song, so I've had to prune the list a little. And so if I don't read out your comment, don't worry. I still read it, and I appreciate your thoughts. So over on Instagram, Lisa Kelly Pennington writes, the Samuel Clemens and Seersucker White Linens line is my favourite. While I'm not from the Deep South, and I've been away a while now, I do like going back to visit. I especially miss it during the winter. I'll never handle a Chicago winter well. It's funny how it creeps up when I don't realise it too. I used some phrase or other a couple days ago, and my two Midwest friends looked at me like I was crazy. I'm glad you got to experience the South for yourself. Thanks, Lisa. And it made this song come to life for you. 3 and 1. Well, glad we're on track for a strong season with your guesses, Lisa. And I hear you on the colloquialisms. You know, my accent and my slang is a mangled mess of Wigan, various parts of the UK, Canada, you know, and throw in the hodgepodge of Saskatchewan, Scottish, Irish, Geordie, Scouse, and Cockney slang that I kind of glommed onto when I was in the military, and I never know whether I'm coming or going. Though I do have a good laugh to myself whenever I hear either of my kids call someone a bellend. Jeannie Anthony responded, definitely a favourite of mine too, and one of the things I love about it is the visuals Tom's lyrics provide. You can imagine yourself right there, even if you've never been. Your trip to Gainesville must have been epic and no doubt left you with lasting, lifelong memories. Yeah, I think I said on the podcast on a previous episode, that trip definitely was transformative, and I hope that I can head back down there again either this year or next, you know, to meet up with friends that I made down there and enjoy the festivities again. My pal, and I think probationary executive producer, Steve Ursell, wrote, I've listened to this song a fair bit over the last few weeks, but it's still relatively fresh for me, being new to the album prior to this season of your podcast starting. I liked it straight away, but it didn't particularly stand out. On re-listens, it's crept up from a 7 to an 8, and after listening to the episode and hearing you wax lyrical and then re-listening to the track a couple of times, I'm going for a 9. So thank you yet again for your persuasive insight. Well, dude, that's so cool to hear, Steve. I think this is one of those deep cuts that Pettyheads gravitate to because of that connection with Tom's roots. It just feels so real and so poignant, but I can see how it maybe wouldn't be a super impactful one the first time you listen to it. Sue Nelson writes, I love this song so much, even though I'm a lifelong Northerner. I think the words really capture the mixed feelings we all have for the places where we grew up, the people and the memories, the nostalgia, the sins, the secrets, and the blessings. Tom's genius songwriting and full display. And I think that's why this song strikes such a chord for me too, Sue. It is specific to Tom's experience of being a Southerner, but written in that deft way that opens it up to anyone who moved away from anywhere at some point in their lives. Mary Beth Donnelly says, this was the song that got me hooked. Probably because the line about seersucker and white linen rhyming with Samuel Clemens made me laugh out loud. Gifted is the songwriter that can make clothing material, linen, seersucker, corduroy, work in a song. And this led to a little bit of discussion about references to clothing in Petty songs, and I shall have to do some more research on that subject to compile a complete list. Rich Gibson says, great episode and analysis, Kevin. Thanks, Rich. And a 10 out of 10 song that is in his top 10 songs ever. The question about guitars, so I was talking about on the episode about what the blend of guitars in there, and Rich says, I'm hearing maybe a couple of 6-string acoustics forming the bedrock. They aren't loud in the mix, so one could be a 12-string. Mike does an arpeggio with some kind of Leslie speaker-type modulation throughout the song, with the exception of the middle verses when the Farfisa organ comes in and gives a breath of fresh air. There's also some kind of on-the-beat percussion in the second half of each chorus, behaving like a cowbell rhythmically, but not tonally. Mike's spider-like, and as you excellently described, childlike part also features Leslie-type modulation, joined at the end by a low double-octave extra guitar. This song, more than always, forms pictures in my mind with each verse. Totally brilliant. And I did check into that guitar tone, Rich. I don't remember now if I said it on the episode, but Tom tells Paul Zollo that it's Mike's Magnatone amp. So I don't know if he's running that Magnatone through a Leslie as well, but it may just be one of those, weird bits of gear that gives you that super, super specific sound. But as always, thanks for lending a critical ear. It's very much appreciated. Nora Hayward Olsen responded, in my interpretation, the song is essentially putting to the test the theory you can't go home again. The protagonist in one verse comes off as a little smug and pretentious. Pretend I'm Samuel Clemens, wear seersucker and white linen. Who would do that except for someone who maybe wants to come off a little bigger than they are? But then we have the protagonist humbling himself once back home. If I crawl to your door, let me sleep on your floor. This person isn't asking for much, just acceptance. And if the acceptance is given, I'll give you all I have and a little more. So, Nora, I'd never thought of that as being a cocky line, which is super interesting and why I love hearing other people's thoughts. I've always read that line as being more childlike, playing dress up as a Southern hero type of thing. But your take on it is really intriguing too. Wayne Helga? Man, I'm struggling with last names these days. Who I think may be a first-time caller, says it's one of his best written songs ever. Incredibly clever, insightful, and mature. The kind of song you like to think would have put him in the running for a Nobel Literature Prize. Yes, it's that good. Sadly, I don't think it's a huge crowd pleaser. At a concert based on the video from the 2006 Gainesville anniversary show, but that's okay. It doesn't detract from the genius of it. I'm happy I'm not the only one enthralled by it. Cheers. And yeah, I don't disagree with that, Wayne. I don't remember it being an overly tepid response during the 30th anniversary gig, but I guess, it would have been a really new song for a lot of people at that gig, as the album had only been out for a couple of months at that point, so maybe it was just one of those timing/unfamiliarity things. Okay, well, to finish up, Kelly Jondro wrote, having lived within 30 miles of the Tampa Bay St. Pete area since 1974, hearing Buster Tampa Bay for the first time at the American Treasure listening party in St. Pete was a literal religious experience. That's why I can't be a last DJ. I have to come up with an infinite number of sets of 5. And yeah, I hear you, Kelly. I do need to resubmit an application to be the last DJ, I think. I was thinking of taking an approach that I don't know if anyone else has. So my idea was to pick 5 songs with my favorite Mike Campbell guitar solos in them. Running Down a Dream obviously has to be in there, but there are also a couple that may surprise a few people. Okay, well, like I said at the top, if I missed your post, please don't think I don't appreciate you taking the time to leave a comment. I very much do. But we should get into this week's song, which is the shortest track on the record. It's the broody, moody, and slightly off-center Jack. I wonder if Jack was a later addition to the album, because it's not one of the songs that Tom played for Paul Zollo when he invited him down to listen to new recordings he was so excited about, or at least it's not one that Paul asked Tom about, and had he heard it, I'm pretty sure he definitely would have asked about it. We can assume that the album wasn't in its complete state at that point, as we know that Tom and Paul talked about next week's song, Turn This Car Around, being a great album opener, which it isn't on the final album, obviously. Jack was never played live, and I can't find any instances of Tom talking about this one. And it's a shame it was never played live, because I could see this one being a fun one to throw in when you're playing songs from the new record and just rotating in one or two of those deeper cuts. But it's one of 6 from this album that were never aired live, with 2 others being aired fewer than 5 times. And I have to check this sometime, but I'm fairly certain that Highway Companion would be the least represented album in Tom's live career in terms of cumulative performances. Obviously, it comes toward the end of Tom's career, but even if you took, the number of possible gigs these songs could have been played at and ran a percentage of that, then I still think it would be underrepresented and maybe at the bottom of the pile. I mean, the only other one I can think of that could run it close would be Songs and Music from She's the One, but we do know that Tom did songs from that album. Walls got played. That got played a bunch of times. So I kind of think that Highway Companion might be the least played live album in Tom's catalogue. So I wonder if this one was a little bit of a harder sell to get the band behind, given only Mike was involved in its recording, or whether Tom just wanted to, this set of songs to be a real sort of tight snapshot in time that wasn't intended to have real longevity in a live setting. Either way, it's a bit of a shame that this one never got an airing. I wonder if Tom and the boys had contemplated a third Fillmore residency, in the years after the 40th anniversary tour. We know that they weren't as interested, or Tom wasn't as interested in being on the road all the time, but maybe they'd done another Fillmore residency. Maybe this would have been a contender for an airing or two. And I remember the first time I heard this one thinking, oh man, that sounds familiar. And I wouldn't have listened to this album until around, I think probably between 2013 and 2015 when I started digging into Tom's catalogue a little more earnestly. But if you remember, in 2011, a huge song hit the airwaves called Somebody That I Used to Know by a band called Gautier, I don't know how it's pronounced. I don't know how to pronounce anything these days, do I? Anyway, that song starts with that very specific 2-note cadence. That one's quicker and in a slightly higher key, but I remember rushing to Wikipedia when I heard Jack to check the release dates, as I was curious to see if one could have informed the other. Now, I'm sure you can trace this type of up-down progression back further than 2006, but it's always struck me how atmospherically similar the 2 songs are in the beginning. Again, we start with 2 guitars, with one being heavily palm muted, while the other adds those little trebly accents. The bass underneath is just stepping down and up on those 2 notes and adding in that ominous rumble. I really should go back through all my notes to try to figure out how many times I've written, this sounds like nothing else in the catalogue. But again, it really does apply here. The percussion at this point is just a side stick count on the snare with an accompanying hat on the same note. It's all super low key, and the word that jumps instantly to mind is brooding. When Tom's vocal comes in, it has that fantastic super short delay and maybe some chorus on it, so that it almost has a ghost of itself that you can hear. Now, I asked my friend Randy about this because I'd said that it could just be doubled. I mean, it could just be Tom doubling his lead and then, running that a few milliseconds behind to catch that same effect. But I suspect, and Randy also sort of thinks that it's probably just a nice delay and just that wee bit of chorus on there to get that nice tight echo on Tom's vocal. And it's an interesting melodic line too, because from the intro, you'd expect this song to develop in a minor key, but instead, it breaks into that major key melody in the verse. Tom's delivery is very rhythmic and percussive too, which again, when coupled with that vocal effect, gives you a somewhat unsure sense of where the song is going to go tonally. When the chord change comes in for the second half of the verse, those little guitar stabs, they're just a little bit brighter and a little bit higher, but the song seems to be settling into an almost... I was trying to think of a way to say this, but it's almost like a sneaky, like a cloak and dagger or furtive kind of feel. There's a weird spy novel feel to it, if that makes any sense. And I've got an idea about that that'll sort of tell you about it at the end. But you get the feeling that whoever this narrator is doesn't really want anyone to hear him going about his business, or he's maybe a little bit sketchy, a little bit shady. This kind of low-key feel, though, is then completely blown out of the water afterwards, after this verse, as we have that break that comes out of nowhere. The drums step forward over that B-sus4 chord and the little lick that Tom tags onto the end. There are still 2 guitar parts and the bass underneath, but the drums and those extra little bits of percussion on the 4th beat of each bar, they really give this section its personality. And that percussion sounds like a wood block hit that's had a ton of reverb added to it to give it that sort of whip crack and echoey effect. After this break, we get an ascending progression underneath the chorus line. And again, it's just a single line chorus in this one. So Tommy's really playing around with form here to keep you slightly off balance with the song. We move back into the next verse with that kick drum on the ones and threes as before, but now with a low growling synth pad in the background to add a little more dark texture. And I love that interplay between the minor key feel and the major key melody. And I know I mentioned that before, but it's one of the features of this song that gives it such a unique vibe and feel. The verse and chorus from here then progress in basically exactly the same form as the first iteration before we break back out of the chorus line into Tom's guitar solo. Yes, Tom's guitar solo, not Mike's. And it's a part that dips its toes into the 60s surf rock form, but also has roots in a more George Harrison-esque delivery. When Tom plays those double stops on the chord change, it really reminds me of the Beatles' version of Words of Love. And I guess if I haven't explained what a double stop is, maybe I've gone over this before, but maybe I haven't. It just means playing a melody on two strings at the same time instead of one. Anyway, look, here. I never play the whole song or significant parts of the song in the episode, but I've pulled out Tom's solo here, and if you just listen to the lead part, it'll be easier for me to highlight what I'm talking about. So, he starts playing on the single notes. Then he plays those double stops that I was talking about here, before finishing on the single notes again. So it's a good reminder that Tom has some lead guitar chops and knows his way around a fretboard. And I love that that part is mixed up nice and high so that it just cuts through over the top of that verse progression. All right, it's time for some petty trivia. Your question from last week was this. Which famous novelist once declared that all modern American literature comes from one book by Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn? Was it A, John Steinbeck, B, F. Scott Fitzgerald, C, Ernest Hemingway, or D, Harper Lee? Well, Harper Lee shares a sad similarity with Mark Twain in that her book To Kill a Mockingbird, as well as Twain's aforementioned masterpiece about Huck Finn, have been routinely removed from school curricula in recent years due to their use of racially problematic language. Now, obviously, as a white guy from England, it absolutely isn't my place to wade into that conversation fully, but having read both books and Huck Finn very recently, it's so completely clear to me that both writers are using that language, and specifically that word, in order to highlight the very racial abuse and callousness with which it's used. It's not used frivolously or gratuitously in either case, and I would hope that both texts remain in the public consciousness for as long as possible because they highlight the very systemic problems that those of us who care about inequality work so hard to combat. John Steinbeck had a very similar preoccupation with America and Americans that Twain did, and wrote with a slightly darker hand but no less compassion or literary dexterity, but I couldn't find any quotes attributable to him that address Mark Twain directly. Likewise, F. Scott Fitzgerald was a known admirer of Twain and again addressed very contemporary American attitudes and foibles in his work. I recently read The Great Gatsby for the first time, and while I found the characters almost entirely unlikable, the prose and the style of the writing was absolutely sumptuous. So that means that your answer for this week is Ernest Hemingway. A couple of years ago, I read For Whom the Bell Tolls for the first time and was again hugely impressed with I'd sort of describe it as the very economic narrative style he uses, especially with the very believable and very compelling dialogue and character interactions that Hemingway describes. Growing up in the UK in the 70s and 80s, there was still a great deal of snobbery around British versus American literature, so I hadn't been exposed to many of the great American writers, Twain aside. I read A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court many times as a boy because it was so fantastical and so funny, and I read The Prince and the Pauper, so I definitely read Twain, but I don't know that I'd been exposed to any of the other great American writers. So I spent a lot of the last 5 or 6 years slowly catching up with some of the classic novels that I'd missed. So if you have any recommendations, do drop them in the socials for me. Your question for this week is this. On the 16 canonical Heartbreakers and solo studio albums, excluding instrumentals, how many songs come in at a runtime under 3 minutes? Is it A, 7, B, 18, C, 29, or D, 41. Okay, back to the song. When we head into the final verse, the synth part is in the next octave up to just give a little bit of tonal development to the song and flesh out the sonic palette a little. We again have that break followed by the chorus line, then a 2-bar guitar fill, the chorus again, then another fill before the song ends on that instrumental break, but just the first half of it. So even the end of the song leaves us without a musical resolution as it lands away from the root chord. So let's talk a little bit about the lyrics, which I didn't do as we were running through the song, as I've been doing lately. I've always thought of this one as another one of Tom's character songs, if not quite being completely narrative. This guy's clearly lost his woman and he's setting out to get her back. Has he betrayed her trust in some way, forcing her to leave? Has she left under some sort of cloud or against her best interests? You know, as with all Tom's best songs of this nature, he only gives us the general outline of the story and lots of room for us to fill in the blanks. You say what you want to, Jack. I'm going to get my baby back. Trouble came right away, and now you say she's gone to stay. Cough it up, hit the street, left without a word to me. Oh, you don't know how that girl could touch my soul. So I've talked about Sting a little on this podcast before, I think, and he's another one of my very favourite songwriters. And he'll do the same sort of thing that Tom's doing here. Trouble came right away. That's just one part. Now you say she's gone to stay. It's another part, and then you have a really broken sentence. Cough it up, hit the street, left without a word to me. It almost has that conversational stream of consciousness to it. In the last verse, though, Tom throws in one of those really quick little vignettes that he likes to pepper into these types of stories. He used to have a son named Joe. Where he gone to, I don't know. Maybe down in Mexico, living off of daddy's dough. Well, Tom, Joe became a CEO, and he's not a good dude. Well, it's not going to be the same Joe, is it? But this incongruous aside just adds to the slightly sort of schizophrenic, seemingly imbalanced mental state of the protagonist of this song. We never really know what happens. We don't really know who this character is, and we're not given any sort of closure on the tale. So, as Highway Companion is a road album, you can almost imagine this song as being a very brief conversation with an odd guy at a gas station while you're picking up road snacks and filling your tank. Another thing I find interesting about this one is we have Tom playing drums, keyboards, presumably one of the rhythm guitar parts, and now lead guitar as well. So, I wonder if Mike wasn't around when they were cutting this one and Tom just decided to have at it himself. You know, Jeff just rolled the tape and let him go. There's no fat on the bones of this one at all, and Tom has the supreme sense to cut it off exactly once its job is done. And I absolutely love that they sequence this one on the album where they do. Coming off Down South and before Turn This Car Around, it really beds us into the road trip vibe that will stay in for at least 2 more songs in this sequence. Okay, before we start wrapping things up, I wanted to just give a quick shout out to the amazing Tim Bullman, the man behind the excellent Judge Timbers YouTube channel. I quite often refer to Tim's channel, and I've talked about it before, when I'm figuring out chord progressions, or especially when I want a guitarist take on what Tom and or Mike are doing. Because watching someone play a part can be super helpful, and often unlocks parts of a song that I might have been trying to unpack with a little less success. On his channel, Tim has done dozens upon dozens of tutorials for Tom's songs, and as I was prepping for this season, I wondered how many songs he'd done from Highway Companion. To my surprise and delight, he'd posted tutorials for almost all the songs, but was missing a couple. Jack was one of those, and we had a little back and forth online, and I was sort of jokingly saying that he should complete the album so that I can refer back to it in the episodes. Well, for Jack, Tim went way above and beyond by recording a full cover with bass, drums, synth, and of course vocals. Please go check that out in the episode notes, and I'll be posting that on my socials too for you so that you can go give it a listen. And I think it's probably time to think about having Tim come back on the show and maybe plug his guitar in so I can pick his brain in real time. And I know he'll be listening to this, so Tim, I'll be in touch. Okay, Pennyheads, that's it for this week. Jack's you got to describe it as a peculiar song. It doesn't have a typical structure, and it's much more a mood piece. And like I said, you almost consider this as a chance encounter on the highway that Tom is taking us down. We don't spend any quality time with this character, but we're left with a slightly gnawing, maybe slightly uneasy feeling about bumping into him. He's going to get his baby back, and we're not really sure whether she wants to be got back. Jack is an essential track on this album, and it's a fine song, and to quote, as I love to quote, Ivan Anderson, it's a small song. However, I can't really put this right at the very top table of Tom Petty compositions as much as I love it. So I'm going to give Jack a very creditable 6 out of 10. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Boneless Podcasting Network, which is a loose collective of podcasting friends and acquaintances brought together and championed by the inimitable Chaz Charles. Go check out the roster by clicking on the link in the episode notes. You can also check out my other podcasts, which are part of the network. Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I co-host with my very, very good friend Randy Woods, who performs all the music that you hear in the podcast. As well as you can check out the Ultimate Catalog Clash that I co-host with my great pal Corey Morissette. Corey also has a brand new show on the Boneless Network called Mixtapes from Hell. Each season, he and his co-hosts Dan and Dwayne will be compiling a mixtape from all the songs in a specific artist catalogue, and they're kicking things off with Cinderella, a band that I really quite like. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Blue Sky at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe as applicable, and again, please leave a review or a rating if you haven't done that. Keep talking to me on social media, and I will read out as many of the comments as I can on a weekly basis. And, as a weekly reminder, the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. So, when you're looking for Tom's music, please visit your local store, go buy some physical media, or visit official streaming platforms. If you're looking for official merchandise, go to store.tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merch for this show, please go to store.tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook. And make sure you check out Tom Petty Radio on Channel 31 on Sirius XM. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about another supremely atmospheric cut from Highway Companion. Turn this car around. Bye-bye.